Ivanovo, winter, 1978. Natasha leaves her apartment at 6 in the morning. Not for work, not for school, for meat. She already knows there's no point going later. By 8, the line will be 100 people long. She stands for 3 hours in the cold, shuffling forward 10 centimeters at a time. When she finally reaches the counter, they give her 500 grams. That's the limit. Per person, per visit. Not a steak, not a roast, mostly bone, a bit of gristle, whatever was left. She takes it, wraps it in her bag, and walks home. What she does know, what everyone in Ivanovo knows, is that somewhere in Moscow, there's a store with everything she needed. Beef, lamb, smoked salmon, French cognac, Finnish boots. No lines, no limits. She knows it exists. She just doesn't know who gets in or how. Here's what's strange about Soviet grocery stores. They looked fine on the outside. A sign, a door, some shelves. But walk inside, and half those shelves were empty. Not empty like a store at closing time. Empty as a permanent state. What was always there? Bread, salt, buckwheat, canned fish of questionable origin, and a jar of something pickled that nobody wanted. What was never there? Good meat, butter without waiting for hours, decent sausage, anything imported. By the late 1970s, meat was rationed in most Soviet cities. In some regions, the allowance was as low as 300 grams per person per month. That's 2 hamburger patties. People developed strategies. Natasha, like millions of others, kept a mental map of every store in her district, which ones got deliveries on which days and at what hour. There was even a name for it, the sausage train. People from Ryazan, Tula, Vladimir, cities 2 or 3 hours away would take the early commuter train to Moscow, buy as much meat and sausage as they could carry, and ride home. There was a Soviet joke about it. What is long, green, and smells of sausage? The Ryazan train back from Moscow. But here's the part that nobody talked about. Turn on Soviet television in 1978 and you'd see something remarkable. Abundance. Shelves full of meat. Bread towers. Smiling workers at well-stocked counters. The official message was simple. Socialism provides. The Soviet worker had everything he needed. Pravda, the main state newspaper, a subscription cost 9 rubles a year, about half a week's wages for an average worker, regularly ran articles about record harvests and growing prosperity. Meanwhile, Natasha was waking up at 5:30 to get to the Ivanovo meat line before it got too long. The gap between the official story and real life was so vast that most Soviet citizens just stopped connecting the two. You watched the TV, you nodded, and then you went to stand in line. The propaganda and the reality existed in 2 completely separate rooms, which makes what happened in that third room so extraordinary. The store existed, and almost everyone knew it. There were jokes about it. Kitchen whispers. Soviet stand-up comedians danced right up to the edge of it, never naming it directly, but the audience always understood. What nobody knew, what was genuinely secret, was the inside. It was called a Spetsraspredelitel, a special distributor, or sometimes simply the closed distributor. There was no sign outside. Sometimes it looked like a regular office building. Sometimes it was in the basement of a government block. You didn't walk in, you were let in with a pass. Inside, shelves full of things that simply did not exist in the normal Soviet economy. Fresh beef, several cuts, smoked sturgeon, real butter, not the blocks of baking margarine people had to settle for. Finnish raincoats, Czech crystal glassware, Hungarian salami, French cognac, not Soviet imitation cognac, but the real imported thing. The prices were subsidized by the state, so not only did you have access to things no one else could buy, you often paid less for them than ordinary people paid for lesser goods. It wasn't a black market,
It was entirely official. It was policy. The state that told everyone it had abolished privilege had built a system of privilege so precise it had its own zip codes. The system had a name for the people who used it: Nomenklatura. This was the Soviet elite, not by blood or money, but by position. Party officials, factory directors, military officers above a certain rank, senior academics, editors of major newspapers, each level of the hierarchy had access to a different level of the system. A regional party secretary got more than a local factory director. A Politburo member got things no regional secretary could touch. The passes were discreet. You didn't flash them. Workers at the Spetsraspredelitel were vetted, sometimes signed non-disclosure agreements, and were very well paid, specifically to keep quiet. One woman who worked as a cashier in a Moscow Spetsraspredelitel in the early 1980s recalled, "The customers never made eye contact with each other. They came in, took what they needed, and left quickly. It was like a transaction everyone agreed to pretend wasn't happening. And ordinary people? They could only look from the outside." Natasha knew something like this existed. Everyone did. But the specific address? The pass? The names on the list? That was another world entirely. She went home, made soup with her 500 grams, and thought about next week's line. Years later, after the Soviet Union collapsed, some of these facilities were documented.
Journalists described walking into former Spetsraspredelitel and finding the shelving still there, the refrigerated cases still installed, everything intact, just empty now. Former Nomenklatura members, when pressed, mostly confirmed what everyone had suspected. Yes, it existed. Yes, it was real. But they always added, it wasn't so much. It was just basics. Just basics. While Natasha stood in the snow for 3 hours for half a pound of meat. The most striking thing isn't the injustice. Injustice is everywhere. What's striking is this: everyone knew. The jokes were everywhere. The whispers were everywhere. But knowing in general, and knowing the specific address, the name on the pass, the list of what was inside, those were two completely different things. The Soviet state didn't just distribute food unevenly, it distributed information unevenly. Natasha knew the shape of the thing, she just couldn't touch it. That was the point.
But special stores were just the tip of the iceberg in a system designed around artificial limits. In our next video, we're diving into the strange world of Soviet communal apartments, where privacy itself became a luxury distributed by the state. Click here to watch it now, and subscribe so you never miss a slice of history.